Okay, so right now it's noon Pacific Daylight Savings Time. It's September 6, 2015, and I have Eric Ballard on the line. Recently, in the middle of July in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, we did the 2015 Energy Science and Technology Conference, and Eric gave a presentation that was almost 4 hours long. That includes questions at the end on the power of the ether as related to music and electricity. And so if you're on this call right now, that means you were invited because you either came to the conference or purchased the presentation, so you've at least seen it. And so kind of just an invitation-only call to give everybody an opportunity to have your questions answered. And I'll go ahead and bring on Eric, and then after we open up for questions, just hit 5*, and I'll know that you want to ask a question. So can you hear me okay, Eric?
Yeah, you're kind of clipping, but I can understand what you're saying.
Okay. And so now the presentation you gave, there's a couple things you wanted to address in it. First, just kind of give a context for the situation behind putting together the presentation, and it's really meant to be just kind of a basic intro to a lot of those things, and if you can just go ahead and take over and go from there.
Yeah, so at any rate, it was kind of a last-minute effort because of the antenna projects and what have you, conflicting with the time that I needed to write it. So, and then I basically discovered in the process that this thing was much larger than I'd ever envisioned. So I had to do a lot of condensing and last-minute writing, and so basically the thing was finished as far as my note writing went about 15 minutes before I actually presented it. It's not a subject that I can speak with absolute authority on like I have in my previous presentations, so that also made it a little more difficult, but it seems like everything I wanted to say got out. Unfortunately, there seems to be some bad voodoo that came with it, and I'm going through some kind of curse or retribution for providing this information to the public, so hopefully that will dissipate, and those that want to get involved in this topic might be forewarned that some of the avenues may get a little scary if you get too deep into them. So that's kind of the scenario in which the presentation was given.
Okay. Before I do open up for questions, just one person sent me some questions by email, so I wasn't able to make it to the call. This is from Brett. He says, I've watched the video a few times now and am struggling to figure out specifically how to apply this knowledge and application. As I understand it in so many words, the patterns discussed during the presentation invite or encourage interaction with the ether. Can you expound on this issue somewhat? How can I utilize this information along with the math that you have developed and released recently to design and build energy machines that efficiently tap into the ether? It seems obvious to me that anytime a field, magnetic or dielectric, is made to change quickly, the momentum of the ether can be tapped. Is this correct?
Well, basically, in the same line of thinking as Pythagoras and Plato, who conceived most of what was presented, is none of this was provided with the intent of building anything or any type of energy machines or any energy devices. Actually, its intent is to transcend all that.
Now, the emails that I received after people watched your presentation, it seems like the most common theme or the most common topic that a lot of people seem to want to learn more about is what are your plans on going deeper into the J.J. Thomson stuff, which you shared at the very end of the presentation?
Well, I'm quite deep into that. In fact, I'm just wrapping that up. So that is basically the last presentation, the extraluminal presentation, where all I could do was just very scantily cover all the different areas of these electric waves and the forms of induction and how they arise out of the ether and what have you. In the most recent presentation, that was given as an appendix. I had spent most of my time, my writing time, where I wasn't out working on stuff before the presentation, developing the J.J. Thomson stuff, which I've now basically finished. So that will be in a book form. The title, Extraluminal Transmission, has been changed. The title of the book, this will be a very big book. And this is volume 1 that I've just completed now, which is basically the history into the general theory. Gets very deep into J.J. Thomson's writings in his big book called Recent Researches into Electricity and Magnetism. So what I've done, as well as with Steinmetz and a few other people, is taken their convoluted expressions, which are dimensionally inconsistent and are filled with typo errors, and the same letter is used for 10 or 15 different things without any drawings or explanations whatsoever, is beat my way through it, damn near killing myself, until I managed to resolve the situation, and then I put that into print. So this will be coming out. The title of the book will be The History, Theory, and Practice of Electric Transmission, where I've gone through the basic ether theories and development of inductance and capacitance and resistance and all the basic terms that are used. And then the next volume will apply it to what is more commonly understood in electrical engineering, which is the two-wire and basic multi-wire transmission systems of transverse electromagnetic waves. And then volume 3 will be taking that information and adapting it and extending it to deal with the special types of waves that you find on the Alexanderson and the Tesla and the Marconi and all of the electrostatic wireless era constructions. And that will take a long time. So at any rate, volume 1 is complete. I pretty much developed J.J. Thomson's vague theory into something where there's diagrams and explanations. The dimensions all work out in establishing resistance and the basic, how the ether polarizes, and I'm pretty satisfied with it. The only complication is taking the 500 pages out of my notebook collection and turning it into something which gets out in print. So that's a big task, and I don't know what kind of delay is going to be entailed with that, but at any rate, the thing is complete and is ready to be deposited for transcription in a couple of weeks. And then that will pretty much explain what is explainable at J.J. Thomson. Otherwise, he really leaves a lot out, and there's not a lot to work with. And all that really can be provided are suggestions for further theoretical thought and experiment. There's no absolute revelations about the ether or whatever, and it all falls back to my most recent presentation, is the ether ultimately is unknowable.
Now that J.J. Thomson work that you're discussing is mostly focusing on is electricity and matter, which was a series of talks. J.J.
Thomson's major effort, and actually one of the most interesting and readable parts of his very large book, is the conduction of electricity through gases and the works of Crookes and other contemporaries that came up with the notions of cathode rays and all these various type of phenomena. But unfortunately, none of that work was really completed, and relativity shot all these people down, even though it's been stated that J.J. Thomson is in direct conflict with Nikola Tesla. That's not the case at all. It actually really supports most of what Tesla was saying. The only problem between the two is Thomson, of course, was dealing with very crude experimental apparatus from early European experiments where there really wasn't much of an understanding of any engineering, nor even any engineering dimensions, where Tesla was a practicing engineer and inventor and developed experimental apparatus that was so far ahead of everybody else as that's what gave him such outstanding results. But unfortunately, Tesla, as a capitalist, hoarded all of his information and never wrote any books. And Thomson, I think, in disgust after the takeover of relativity and the Einsteiners, even though he lived basically the same years as Tesla, just as Tesla did after Wardenclyffe, which occurred about the same time, Thomson just simply shut up because the world said that he was full of it, and Einstein was where it was at, which is really unfortunate because there's a lot that could have been learned there. So this is the complication you face when you're getting into any of this stuff, is all you're going to end up with is scraps. It's like trying to reconstruct the dinosaur out of 10 or 15 bones that you found in a swamp, even though there's thousands of them that make up the body. It's a very difficult process.
Now, when you mentioned the bigger book, like a lot of people are familiar with electricity and matter, but there's a bigger volume, and does that one give more insight into Thomson's work, or does it just...
Yeah, that's basically what he does in there. Well, he subtitles the book as a sequel to Maxwell's work, but is what you start to find in his writings is he has a whole different view than that of James Clerk Maxwell, and it adheres more closely with the original ideas of Faraday. Unfortunately, all these people seem predisposed to make everything so unnecessarily mathematical complicated with no diagrams or drawings or physical explanations whatsoever, but just C's and C's of partial differential equations and multiple coordinates and all that type of stuff. It just makes it too complicated to work through, and you can't get anywhere with the stuff. That's the problem. So what I did in my most recent writing is I eliminated all the extraneous coordinates. I basically, with the work of Steinmetz and Kennelly and Heaviside, in specifically quantifying what each variable, like, we've established E as electromotive force, and we've established I as current, and all those things. I've gone through and taken all these random letters and given them conventional terms, which I've established in all of my writings. So anyone that's read any of my materials should be very clear with what uppercase E means and lowercase e means, and what L means and I and all these type of things. So cleaning up all the variables into a consistent and understandable format, and getting rid of all the extraneous dimensions, getting rid of the 1 over the speed of light squares and the 4 pi times 10 to the 9th and all the other crap, is I distilled the thing down into a very basic algebraic and geometric understanding of how the ether specifically interacts with the conductors in a transmission line, and how resistance and inductance and all these things come about. The other parts of Thomson's book are, I'll just simply take a lifetime to work out all the electromagnetic wave equations. But again, what's important is Thomson seems to be moving away from electromagnetism and coming up with another type of concept that seems more in tune with how actually light and electricity and these various things work. And that's what makes it particularly interesting, but it does not bring you to a point where you have a solid feeling that you understand what's going on. That's the problem.
Can you give a couple of examples of, let's say, the understanding of J.J. Thomson's work is understood deeper, in the direction that you're moving? What are some of the applications of this knowledge?
Well, one thing that J.J. Thomson seems to be continually bringing up is the two modes of propagation. the one which is considered to be of an electromagnetic form, which he expresses a little differently than is commonly understood, but also the one that Tesla used, the longitudinal form, because he gives validity to that concept. But as far as anything becoming solidly engineerable, it's not really at that point yet. His works was not written for engineers. It was never meant to be read by engineers. It's strictly for interchange between academians, and they could give a damn about, what practical use was going to come out of it or any of that kind of stuff. They were still caught up in the old theoretical, philosophical view of electricity and not its practical application. So it has to be worked over a lot before anything specific technologically is going to come out of it, because it wasn't really intended for that.
Can you talk a little bit on inertia?
Well, that's his central theme, is that the ether, as he calls it, is a storehouse of mechanical momentum, which means that the ether has substance, at least when it's polarized electrically, and that matter itself, most likely, is just a collection of polarizations in the ether and has no ultimate physical existence. And the relativistic concept, where you can't bring an object up to the speed of light or faster because of a bunch of cockamamie ideas, is made very clear by Thomson, is ether just simply won't drag sideways that fast. And its tubes of induction are so firmly implanted in the matter that they terminate upon that it's simply going to prevent the matter from moving. So what it is the ether actually adds to the mass of the object as it starts to move faster and faster in space, which basically indicates that the matter or the physical object is now extended through space in the form of the ether, and itself is part of the ether. And it's kind of an interesting philosophical way of looking at it. Clearly, Thomson came up with the idea of the quantum, of the so-called relativistic velocity, and many of these other concepts long before these other people jumped on it and made their world fame out of his ideas.
And what about canceling inertia? I mean, these are all possible applications at some point with the...
Well, yeah, because it brings up the condition where, okay, we can take, for example, an automobile, flying down the road at some speed, and you slam on the brakes, and of course, the brakes get hot, and there's time delay involved in slowing down, and there's all this, inertial force pulling on the automobile and your body and everything else as you change velocity. Well, in the view of J.J. Thomson, that is all a result of the electric field which has attached itself to the body of the automobile. In other words, the magnetic lines of force that are moving through its permeability and the dielectric lines of force which are terminating upon its molecules, that somehow, if like the way the Navy makes their ships magnetically invisible, if you create a magnetic potential, so to speak, in the automobile, or in the Navy's case, the ship, so that it doesn't pull any of the Earth's magnetic lines of force into it, but leaves its environment undisturbed. If you carry that further and remove the electrostatic or dielectric lines of force and completely depolarize the automobile, then theoretically you should be able to step on the brakes and the car will stop instantaneously without being thrown around, or the automobile being contorted in the wheels and all that type of stuff. And in that case, you can accelerate or whatever, and this is the so-called, electric spacecraft idea of these flying objects that people give various accounts of and give various erroneous theories about. They exhibit that kind of movement, and that means that such a vehicle would be utilizing the ideas of J.J. Thomson and neutralizing the electric field Yeah, you have to remember when I say electric field, I'm using Steinmetz's terms. Electric field means the combination of the magnetic and dielectric, not the electrostatic. So the term electric field includes both. You have to get rid of both. Now, one thing that Thomson advances is he considers the magnetic field only a secondary aspect of the dielectric field and comes up with a unified field theory where there is only one field. So the electric field is derived from the dielectric field. And that would give his theory of the propagation of light and the form of light now starts to take on a more corpuscular form where the ether is wrapped up into these lines of force, and that produces the specific quantum of light, which goes along with the contemporary theory, quantum theory, and kind of creates a new way to look at optics and propagation. But like I say, it's a deep subject, and he only opens the door to it, and it's open for anybody to carry it any farther through experiment or philosophically or however they want to go about it. But it's not like Steinmetz where, it can lead to the construction of a working transformer or a working transmission system. It's not intended to be that way.
Does he mention anything specifically relating to gravity?
No, they all stay away from gravity because gravity is just simply undefinable. So they stay away from it, and also stay away from giving any specific constitution of the ether. These things are just established as unknowables, and all he basically deals with is, the theoretical implications and outcomes and what have you of his experimental researches with the interaction between electricity and rarefied gases, and Faraday's work on electrolysis and electrical flow through liquids. So it is experimentally based. It's not pure abstract theory. It's experimentally based, which makes it valuable because it's real.
Mm-hmm. Do you want to touch a little bit on the music side of things before we open up for questions? Like if y'all have seen the presentation, there was a gentleman helping Eric with some music samples. That's Charles Roland Berry, a classical music composer from Seattle, and he's involved in some of the music communities that are into some of the ancient music, and so naturally gravitated towards Eric's work in this area. Do you want to kind of mention some of the music stuff that you're working on and where you're looking at going with all that?
Well, that's kind of my main interest right now, is music. The so-called free energy stuff and all that, I've completely abandoned all that. I have no interest in that anymore. No one has really produced anything that works, and I'm not going to waste my time or anybody else's money pursuing any of that. The Earth signal thing is a audio type of thing where the Earth itself actually becomes a musical instrument and a playable musical instrument and a stereo concert hall. That was the main emphasis of my research at Landers. I still am into the Tesla and Alexanderson longitudinal modes of transmission and the earthquake forecasting system. But again, these things all work on frequencies that are pretty much within the audio range. But when I got into the versor algebra book, I started to have reawakened me a connection I made long time ago when I was studying music in college and first started listening to Bach and first became involved with polyphase power systems, that there's a distinct connection between music and electricity, particularly polyphase power, and that got me interested again when I recently wrote this versor algebra book to get into those aspects of music, specifically how they relate to the music of Bach, and try to express musical as a versor form. It comes up with a lot of interesting ratios and proportions that seem to really excite the musicians. It turns out that what I learned in producing this presentation, that just like the work of Tesla and Thomson and all the greats of the 19th century, whose work has become muddled and forgotten and reduced to, the most gross aspects. The same thing happened to music, and there's this giant world that precedes Johann Sebastian Bach of music that has just simply been erased from all the books. So a lot of music people are very excited about that there's a possibility to take music in directions that it's never been taken before. The only problem is, the public at large has no interest in it, just like, the so-called authorities and principals and whatever in society have absolutely no interest in the advanced seismic warning system.
So, in the reverser algebra books, that's showing how to analyze polyphase music with your reverser algebra system. Now, going in the opposite direction, couldn't you start off with some type of geometrical pattern and go backwards through the math to create music that way, to see what kind of music comes out of it?
Well, yeah, that's what I'm heading towards. So I'm working on that right now, amongst other things. What I learned probably more from producing this presentation than anybody that viewed it. And I found out that there's recent work from the 20th century. A person by the name of Albert von Thimas and another person named Hans Kaiser that had advanced the geometric and numerological ideas of Pythagoras and Plato into a number matrix that is almost identical to the one that applies to polyphase power systems. So right now I'm struggling with the Hans Kaiser, but at any rate, to get an idea of this relationship and then to see how the musical forms and the electrical forms are interchangeable in order to produce music from polyphase power systems or to produce polyphase systems from music.
Is there anything else you want to cover, and then we can go ahead and open up for questions? Or
I think that pretty much covers it.
Okay. Now, if anybody has a question, on your phone keypad, just hit 5 star. And I can see, I believe that's Jeff. Do you have a question?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I hear you.
Yeah, we can. Go ahead.
Oh, good.
Go ahead, Jeff.
Hey, Eric. I talked to you about your AN SP39 SPS 39 power slides, and what's the best tube that you're designing with the two in the 200 series for your telluric stuff? If I can find some for you.
I use Western Electric tubes, the 417 and the 418.
Okay, 417, 418. Okay, what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to get an investor angel for you. The Verser 2 book that came out, we're trying to use with DNA, electrification-wise, with your Tesla magnifying transformer work from a long, long time ago. But I have a 3-part question. Okay, on your PDF of your presentation for the music, on page 56 you got the even harmonics. On page 60 you got the sum of the even harmonics that create the sawtooth. On page 62 you've got the odd harmonics, and on page page 64 you've got the final Tesla wave impulse. Okay, I want to correlate. The question I got is, we're trying to make basically, if I could get you a contract for making a bigger transformer, could you overlay the sawtooth on top of the odd harmonics to make it more powerful in Tesla wave impulse, or does that come naturally?
No, they'll cancel each other out.
Oh, they'll cancel, so you don't want to do that?
No.
Oh, thanks. That's an easy question then. Okay, all right. So next, the real important one is, okay, when you're doing the electrostatic antenna, and you found the 2 to 3 ratio coming out of counter space on the harmonics, and the transverse are 1 to 4. Okay. On the can you calculate an extraluminal velocity of that 2/3 counter space ratio coming out if someone was to try and measure it out of something that's organic? Is there any way you could do anything like that at a guess?
Well, I'm not really sure what you're talking about.
When you said that the
ratios.
okay, when you said in the counter space, the slope ratio coming out of counter space of the harmonics was 2 to 3. The slope ratio from, and you said it was in the Marconi book, and then you just made mention it like minute 46 in the I think in the first segment of the presentation, the early half of the videos.
Okay.
But the comment was that the transverse waves had a 1/4 slope harmonic. Okay, but the counter space ones had a 2/3 slope. They were higher in the back end. They were higher.
Those slopes were basically arbitrary, depending upon the coordinates on the graph. The only thing of significance is the spatial harmonics occur in arithmetic multiples, where the counter space harmonics occur in geometric divisions. In other words, the harmonics become lower in frequency logarithmically in counter space, and the harmonics become higher in frequency arithmetically in space.
Right. So this is the additive time in versus the multiplicative for the inner counter space. Those sort of issues along those lines.
Yeah, it's a consequence of relationships between frequency and wavelength being hyperbolic.
Right. Okay.
So one side is going to be linear, and the other side is going to be logarithmic. So I've actually been able to make these counter space waveforms with networks, which I hope to do again before long. But I'm kind of limited at what I can do here because I don't really have the proper facilities to work on stuff, and I'm missing a lot of components.
Right. Well, here's the strategy: is you'll know that I've delivered for you if you get some investment from this, from like tubes and power supplies and some support for this stuff. And then, because this one guy that's doing super DNA work is so impressed with your Versa 2 thing, it's going to help with DNA stuff. So that's the only question I got, but just keep going, and we'll try and get some stuff for you, okay?
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, thanks.
Well, one thing I'll point out about the Versa algebra book is it's definitely not something that's just specific to polyphase power systems, but it's a very unique form of mathematics that I'm really surprised was so totally ignored, but not totally surprised, being that it was produced by an electrical engineer and not an academician. But the use of multiple coordinate systems, in that case in time, and in my Theory of Wireless Power book in space, allows for a much deeper understanding of what's going on in the situation than this cubic coordinate system of so-called 3 dimensions, which is totally erroneous. There's only 1 dimension in space. It's 3 distinct coordinates. This whole idea of dimensions instead of coordinates and whatever, if that mind virus can be broken, it's anyone's guess as to what can be arrived at through the application of that mathematics.
Yeah, go ahead. We can hear you.
Yeah. First off, Eric, thank you for everything you've done. I think a lot of us are fed up with our current academia and the way things are going, and we're like, what happened? And Tesla had something, and everybody else missed it, and maybe other countries ran with it. So thank you for helping us understand this stuff better again. When it comes to music and everything, I kind of grew up in a musical family, and my grandfather played organ, and so even when I look at things religiously, it seems like maybe even in the creation there was the word and there was sound, and these other things maybe actually did create and form things. And when you're talking about these things, maybe there's it's all seems to be more and more connected the more and more I hear about these things. So I'm kind of curious, if these things like Pythagoras is trying to help us elevate ourselves, well, I think that's kind of what God has been trying to help us, is to get back to Him. We're trying to elevate us. We had to kind of go through this lower realm, but we have to overcome the effects of the fall. I didn't know. I'm just kind of curious, what is, sometimes people use these things to heal or to help or to elevate spiritually or whatever. I mean, what is, or even transmute elements or whatever you want to do. but it's just, what is your hope that we can learn from these things to accomplish? What would you like to see us really get out of these things? Or what are your hopes that maybe we can use this stuff in a good way?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I just do it. It's just like just something that I do. I don't have any, why would you say, long-term goals or whatever. It's something that needs to be done. This material's lost. It needs to be brought back out before it disappears forever. And I've been assigned that task, just like, something that would happen in the military. I don't have any say over it. It's just what happens. It definitely seems that it can really change things for the better in, one sense or another, but do people really want to change for the better? Are there any people left around that can change for the better? So, it kind of gets into a difficult situation to be specific about.
Well, I would hope that the people that do want to are gravitating towards you. And, and like you say, maybe there's bad mojo. I can only imagine because, sometimes, this knowledge can be useful, but in the wrong hands, it can be misused. Anything that has a greater potential for good has the equal and opposite greater potential for evil. And I can only hope that it's the good people that are gravitating towards you. But you never know, because in a public realm, you just don't know. But
well, I mean, that's the situation, because you're dealing almost with a voodoo type of reality when you start to get into this stuff, and and there's those agencies that have a habit of taking that stuff and using it for twisted purposes and making wrecks out of the people that did the work for them. I know a number of specific examples, so that's why, ultimately, I would rather not really engage in any type of public presentation or any of that stuff, but just get back to my original desire, which is to build equipment and do experiments, just because that's what I do, and useful products like audio amplifiers or, musical instruments or these specific CRT displays that I've developed that I call the music television, and that's kind of what I really want to get into. I don't want to get into a lot of mathematics or theory or whatever, but that's what I have to do in order to support myself and to keep myself from going nuts when I sit in my car in the bushes.
Well, we appreciate it still. I know it's maybe not everything you wanted to do, but we certainly appreciate it.
Well, it is satisfying, the letters I get, the positive influence it seems to be having on people and initiating their interest in all kinds of things, and seems to have created some kind of movement, which, ultimately I will probably be punished for.
Well, hopefully not, but one other question is, like, obviously there's a lot of ancient knowledge that has been lost over time. It's just a given. You see all these programs on TV trying to figure out how they built the pyramids. Still can't figure it out. Everybody's got their theories. And then, like, even we have that Ed Leeds Scalnan who built that coral castle in Florida, said he thought he figured out how they did it, but because he could use some sort of magnetic, or well, he called it magnetics, to actually float huge, I don't know what they were, limestone or whatever they were, these huge blocks, multiple 26 tons plus. So I mean, the ability to use this stuff constructively, would be a fantastic thing. I always, think, wouldn't it be great to move the piano around with just gravity or whatever, but whatever you want to call it. But, is there any hope that we'll ever get something constructive out of this? I mean, it'd be nice. I just wondered what.
Well, I have no idea, and like I say, my orientation is not technological in this stuff, and I've become kind of opposed to the whole technological thing and the whole concept of energy in general. I think it needs to be transcended.
Well, what kind of transcendence would you like to see happen? You know, just go more towards the alpha universe, like you're saying? Is that your thought on it?
Well, I don't know, because the situation is so thick into itself. But, there's no reason to be driving around in a six-wheel pickup truck that's as empty as your head.
Well, I agree with that. Well, anyways, thank you so much.
We can take it back from there.
All right, I'll let you go on to the next person, Aaron.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can you hear? Okay, great. Hi, my name is Leah Caldwell, and I wanted to make an observation, and I wanted your thoughts about it. When in a course that I had taken, they had spoken about the composition of the universe, and about 72% of it is dark energy, about 24% of it is dark matter, and the other 4% is matter. And in my own instinctive belief, I believe that this incomprehensible part, which is being defined as dark energy, I believe that is actually sound. And what interested me so much, Mr. Dollard, about your presentation is the fact that you seem to, through Mr. Thompson, you seem to have, I guess, stumbled into it or researched into it, this very powerful area which has to do with the very fabric of our universe, of our experience, which is sound, and how it relates mathematically. In other words, how it can be defined. So this is a very powerful revelation that you had to kind of go back and figure out. But I think that you should really understand that. Of course, people are going to want to compromise you with this much power, but this is something that could really break free the masses, and it could break free our planet and take us to levels where we really should be. So I would encourage you, despite people or entities, challenging you or trying to scare you, I would ask you to really step up and understand that you are, I believe, creating a new entree for the world. And I just wanted to say to you, because you're coming, I think, so close to the very definition of energy, maybe it's considered dark energy, but I think it is based in sound, and I think that what you're doing is entering an area which maybe is extremely powerful, maybe more powerful than the term energy. So that was my comment, and I just, again, thank you for the presentation.
Yeah, well, that's kind of how I look at it. It's a sound situation. The so-called music of the spheres. One of the things that's pointed out in the book I'm studying by Hans Kaiser is how our whole way of using our perceptions is completely rejected sound, and it's all based pretty much on touch and what boils down to oral fixation. And sight tends to predominate things, and sound is a lost mode of perception, so music is a way to bring that back to life again. There's incredible power to music, depending upon how it's assembled and constructed. That's kind of what the basis of my whole presentation was. And in developing that, changes can occur, but like I say, I don't really tend to think totally in those type of terms. So, and as I pointed out, this is not a subject where I can speak with absolute authority like I can on wave propagations, on transformer windings or something like that. I'm sticking my neck out in this area. That's why I'm kind of being a little bit convoluted with my answers.
Okay, does anybody else have any questions about this presentation that Eric gave?
I have.
Phone number ends in 0. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, Eric, this is Franklin Amador. I just looking over at Aether and some of the items I've come across. I was just wondering if you thought there was a relationship in the energy for, say, voltage cross current, electric magnetic field crossed a different, say, different amounts of voltages, equating it to a rainbow effect where high voltage, low current crosses will give you maybe a purple high-end spectrum, and then low voltage, high current cross energies will give you a different. Have you ever come across an idea like that, or have thought about in that same thought pattern?
Not really. So high current situation tends to produce a lot of heat, where a high voltage situation tends to produce more of an ionizations and colder type of phenomena, and it also is more likely to produce life form related phenomenon. So that's also why Tesla was interested in the high voltage low current, because it had those particular attributes, and that's why it was so useful to the experiments of Thomson and Crookes and others, is that's what was necessary to get into the intermolecular dimensions was the electrostatic potential, and the current was usually inconsequential in those type of situations. It was all electrostatic potential. So either with an all-current situation or all so-called voltage situation, at those points you have the absence of energy and you have something else. But then it takes some energy to get that going, because every current has some kind of EMF and every electrostatic potential has some kind of current. But to break it down specifically into colors or what have you, I don't see where it really goes that route.
That was my question.
Okay, thanks. You can go ahead and ask your question.
Hi, my name's Vern. My question is whether you have looked into or consider Walter Russell's work or the work of John Worrell Keeley, specifically on Russell, his division of the elements into groups of 10 octaves, 9 or 10. Thank you.
You still there? Is that the extent of your question? Because there's a noise that interrupted it.
Yes, that's the extent of my question. Just if you have any comments on either Walter.
Well, I was going to include a lot more of Walter Russell's diagrams in the presentation, but then there was a lot of stuff I was going to include, and it just became too much. So that stuff's all in storage for possibly future presentations. Walter Russell's kind of hard to comment on because he comes from his own angle on everything, but nevertheless, a lot of his diagrams seem to correlate very closely with things I've discovered in my antenna work, with the relations between the electrical fields exterior to the mass of the Earth and the electric fields in the interior, inside the mass of the Earth, and how it relates to earthquakes and tornadoes and hurricanes. And he uses a lot of versor symbolisms, which, of course, the academician would just completely reject, but nevertheless, it's just like the symbolisms of Robert Flood. They might seem absolutely meaningless to somebody, that's an Einsteiner, but nevertheless, in Flood's case, they're so archetypal that much later Carl Jung found that a lot of Flood's versor diagrams are innate in the deep memory of all humans and can be brought out, even though these people have never seen any diagrams by Robert Flood. And I think Walter Russell did a similar thing, but it's from such a different angle. It makes it, you can't really sit down and analyze it in the normal sense. It's something you have to kind of meditate on while you're in the bushes and just like stare at it and get these like feelings out of it. But it's not it's not something you're going to end up building something out of. But then I don't know, because I'm just opening all this up. This is not. Good job, Eric. It's not my position as an electrical engineer to even get into any of these kind of things normally, but as soon as I got into this polyphase mathematics, then it just naturally had to go into music.
Okay. Do you have any comment on Keeley?
Well, I know he was working with the sound thing and some other stuff with inharmonic patterns, but it seems to be, I've never really found anything that interests me. Maybe it was just never provided to me, but Russell seems to be something more of interest to me, and Keeley, I think a lot more was put on him than it was actually available. I think it's like the Ed Leedskellen or whatever his name is. It's an unknowable. Same thing with Nikola Tesla. It's unknowable. And everybody just jumps on the unknowable bandwagon, and because it's unknowable, then they can make up a bunch of cockamamie stories and some kind of construed verification in something they read about Tesla, which was probably never printed. And it just all turns into random noise and has no scientific or philosophical value because it's just random. So that's kind of the way I look at Keeley and a lot of other stuff.
Okay.
But I haven't given up on Russell.
Go ahead and ask your question.
My name is Bruce here. Eric, thank you very much for creating this presentation. And Aaron, thank you for promoting it. For those of you listening who haven't purchased a copy or been to the seminar, I can say that it's a very good value. Please invest in this. There was a point, Eric, when when you were referring to the music of Bach, that you said the music was out of phase. And I wonder if you could comment on that a little bit. There was another point towards the end where you were describing the difference between power and energy. I wondered if you could just touch on those two things. Thank you.
Okay. Well, if I said that Bach's music was out of phase, I was referring to what is normally called equal temperament. It actually turns out that Bach nor any of his contemporaries actually adhered to equal temperament as it's understood today, but had contrived various scales to get around this complication that the original musical system of Pythagoras and Plato is not, it can't be made chromatic. In other words, you can't start shifting from one key to another, and you can't go to the full extent of all the scales with all of a sudden things don't line up. So the architecture of the music structure does not allow for a more developed form of music, particularly polyphony. So when I say Bach's music is out of phase, that means a lot of those harmonics that I showed in the beginning can only exist very briefly because there's this constant interference pattern going on between the various tones, and they don't necessarily reinforce each other harmonically, so it tends to produce a lot of noise and beat frequencies in the music. But that was just what was necessary to tolerate in order to expand music where you could play in all keys, which of course Bach was very interested in doing. His aim was to get as many pipes in the organ to make sound as possible, but then there's the mathematical complication within the musical structure is they don't relate to each other properly, and they produce unpleasant sounds. The thing with power, Steinmetz seems to regard power as a more primary dimensional relationship than energy. Energy is just the time accumulation of power. I believe that a lot of what Tesla developed was power-based and not energy-based, in that all the energy exchanged in the various portions of the cycle is all given back to the system in the end. That seemed to be the basis of Tesla's devices. And I kind of have a vision of a technology that's based on power rather than energy, where all the so-called energy is recycled at the end and nothing is really used up.
Very good. Thank you.
Do you have any other comments, Eric, or anything you want to add?
No, I think I've pretty much covered it. A number of people have requested the written form of it. But the thing is, I'm still working on the written form of the prior presentation, the extraluminal, which is part of which is finished, and I hope I can get it out publicly in a reasonable amount of time. And I'm still working on the book from the first presentation, which is the Verser book, because there's a volume 3 and then there's a volume 4, which connects it to the music of Bach. So I've kind of overloaded myself with all this stuff. And like I say, I'd much rather be building things and putting these CRT displays together and doing antenna work and that kind of stuff. I'm really burned out on all this.
Mm-hmm. So recently you've been spending a lot of time dismantling a lot of the equipment.
Yeah, I mean, so much stuff is built up, and, you know, I'm really desirous to be able to do at least some basic experiments and some network analysis and stuff. So somebody bought me enough test equipment so that I can start doing this stuff, and I have a bench, but...
like things are moving forward pretty good with the current seismic project, and you're expecting to be able to receive signals out of the ground by the end of the year?
Well, yeah, I mean, you know, I'm inching forward from, you know, the standpoint of living in my Toyota Corolla, you know, and the associate I have in his Toyota pickup truck. Mm-hmm. It kind of, you know, when people see the Corolla unload massive quantities of equipment, or the Toyota pickup truck driving down the street with 30-foot utility poles strapped to it, it does make their eyes bug out that this is definitely a physical non sequitur that we're taking on, where we're managing. We have 4 miles of poles in 2 locations out in the desert. We have approximately another 15 or 20 related for dismantling and what have you, and we have to do all this by ourselves. And you know, right now I need $10,000 to drill the ground rod holes, and that's not available. So we have this fused volcanic ash here. It has a rock, and it's highly non-conductive, and there's no particular vegetation that I can use as a grounding terminal, so we're going to have to try to do this with ground rods or whatever. And right now we have no way to handle the long lengths of line wire. We have to put the thing together with field telephone wire, but at any rate, we got the cross arms up on the poles. We have the terminal equipment, which will have to be repaired and fooled with, but we have the terminal equipment, and we have quite a few ground rods. And so I expect we'll assemble the Alex Anderson on the pole pair. The outside pairs, we can't get those up yet, so the Alex Anderson one's the most important. We'll get that up. We'll sectionalize it with whatever networks we can put together with what we got. We'll achieve enough coupling with the ground rods to hopefully get something, and this NV Energy harmonic-infested 4-wire power line that occupies the same part of the desert that we do will probably cause salacious interference. But nevertheless, we should have a working receiving system despite all those things. The question is, will the Earth be generating any signals to demonstrate at the time because of this extremely low solar cycle that we're going through? The Earth is not making a lot of signals, particularly any of significant magnitude to overcome the power line interference. So I'm not claiming, you know, by the end of the year we're going to have this glorious chorus of Earth signals, but the transmission device will be working, and it'll be working to the point where when somebody's around to listen out in the field where this thing is established, it will pick up the signals prior to a massive seismic event. But the complication is getting the necessary transmission structure to some place where somebody can be monitoring it all the time, where there's relays and alarms and what have you. And that's another mile of transmission line where we have no poles or anything. We have the right of way, but we don't even have an inkling of what's necessary, nor can we do all of that by ourselves to put the display facility in the town here where somebody can be keeping an eye on it all the time. We do have the equipment has been acquired, some equipment that I would never thought I would ever see again for the Earth stereo in particular. And, I think we put 4 years of effort now in glomming the materials and getting the right-of-way and all that to build this 1 mile section, and it will be completed by the end of the year, and it can be demonstrated. And hopefully, when something's shown working, we can get some more support or whatever. Now we have another structure in the Mojave Desert where a lot of the wire is already up. It's not sectionalized. We have a very dangerous situation in the repair of a cross arm has split on a corner pole, and the wires are all flying to the side, and it's very dangerous to get up there and fix that, and we have to figure out a way to do that by hand without getting injured or screwing the whole thing up. We have a type of vegetation, same vegetation there as Landers. It's called a greasewood bush that has roots that go down 100 feet, so grounding there is very easy. And we do have 5 miles of direct burial cable, which could have been damaged by a lightning strike. I have to test that yet. That's another complication in these desert environments is if you get a lightning strike, it just wipes everything out. And also one of the biggest AC power lines in the United States runs through the area. So it's not like, all of a sudden, I got $10 million grant and we can put, 30 miles of poles up in a quiet place out in the desert and hire, a massive electrical contractor to put all that stuff in. The people do the work for the power company and build, our terminal buildings just like the ones that the phone company has and get it to that point, even like it was in Landers, where it's receivable with perfect fidelity and has all the display instruments. We can't get the strip chart recorders anymore. We can't get the meters anymore. Can't get anything anymore to do any of this stuff, having to pick a piece of time off of eBay. So anything that gets done or completed should be regarded as a miracle.
Well, there have been quite a few miracles. I mean, you and Justin have made phenomenal progress on the budget that's available to work with, plus just the time that's available to do these projects, which is limited throughout the year depending on the season. But now on the seismic lines, for example, besides just picking up earthquake signals, and you're talking about Earth stereo, how does that fit into those lines? Like you're using those antennas to kind of use the Earth as a concert hall to listen to radio stations around the world, or how does that fit into the music?
Well, there's a couple different avenues. So anybody that knows of Steve McGreevy's work knows that the Earth actually starts to become musical. In fact, it becomes very musical before a large earthquake. That's what I determined at the facility at Landers, and other people have determined in their experiments too, way far back before I even got into this. I was allowed to hear recordings of signals before earthquakes. There's one person named Mike Thoreau who was heavily involved in this way back in the days I was involved with Borderland, and totally demonstrated this musicality before a major earthquake. It was rather stunning. The sounds that the Earth generated was like those giant Tibetan gongs, or I think they're Tibetan. These big things that they hit with the padded hammers that make these deep pulsating tones between 200 and 400 cycles. At Landers, it was more of a shriek before the earthquakes. The station operator described it as a woman screaming. From my observations, it's the kind of a steel drum sound or steel wires or whatever as the Earth's electrical field starts to work itself up into hurricanes and tornadoes and other types of things. So there is the musical sounds that the Earth generates itself. Now, the Earth stereo thing is rather fascinating. That's something I discovered in my RCA days with the RCA receivers, is that if you have two antennas at, let's say, right angles to each other and distant, you have this very special type of phase coherent receiver where you have two identical receivers that run off a common master oscillator. What I discovered in my laboratory was when you would tune into a distant station, one playing music, let's say, and then you would listen to it in stereo through this receiver, the condition would develop where the musical instruments from the music being transmitted by the station in mono, because it was a isolated station, when that signal echoed around the Earth ionosphere waveguide as a concert hall, you would get a type of stereo where each of the instruments would float around in its own independent position in the room, depending upon the variations in the ionosphere and the Earth's magnetic field. And you could virtually reach out and touch these things, but they weren't there, but you could identify them being there. And then at Landers, I never was able to get a truly coherent receiver to fully duplicate that, but I did have a pair of receivers that locked onto the AM carrier and gave me a certain amount of phase coherence, and listening to this fantastic music that comes out of all these places in Eastern Europe and China and what have you, and put together a big sound system with a 100-watt amplifier and some large speakers, and I was starting to get the same effect. The Earth itself is a concert hall, and you could very easily have, a performance at a point location and have the Earth as the concert hall work that sound and then pick it up at a distant receiving station and then put it on some type of carrier transmission like the internet, and it would be a type of stereo available to everybody. They wouldn't have to have all the equipment. It's the same thing with the Earth sensing thing. This is what we were heading towards at Landers, is we were going to use a Bell telephone carrier format, which is called T1, and it was possible to put that out on the internet where anybody would be able to hear these signals. It's the same thing that we're considering with the stuff that Steve McGreevy's doing, is instead of fooling around with hand-wound coils on your hands and knees in the ice up in Canada, is to get the money to build a full-size station where you have enormous loop antennas, and then you put that on a carrier system and put it on the internet, and that way everybody can hear it, and you don't have to do all that fooling around, and you don't have to deal with the interference. And then the other thing is also with the Landers facility, through the internet, it was possible to make an arrangement where you could take your own receivers and plug them into your computer and use my antennas, and no one person's receiving would interfere with anybody else's person's receiving, because the whole thing would come in broadband, wide spectrum, and you could pick up all these fantastic signals without having to have your own 100-acre antenna field. So that's one of the things that I initially was striving for that got completely screwed up, and I'm still thinking in those terms. That's basically my primary objective right now, is to duplicate what was lost at Landers. The earthquake thing being actually just a small part. And then, of course, there's the communications aspect to this. I'm very intent on duplicating what Tesla was attempting at Wardenclyffe on a much smaller scale in the AM broadcast band or on the 160-meter amateur radio band. But, again, the facilities are not available for that. And I have to have somebody make the coils for me and those kind of things and whatever. But, these are the things that I'm polarized towards, and if I have the means to do it, I will do it.
Mm-hmm. Are you able to mention anything about the music project you're working on with Chuck and Robert?
Well, right now that's kind of on standby because everybody's busy trying to make money, so they don't get swept away, and that's taken up all the time. So we're not really interacting on that right now. But we made a later point that the main project right now between the three of us is the Hans Kaiser book. So I have been commissioned to read the book and analyze it and do the same thing I did with the other books, is to turn it into a more standardized format and get all the bugs and errors out of it and try to figure out where it's coming from, and then write my own book on it. Mm-hmm. So that'll be a ways off. And then the other thing is developing unique musical scales and seeing how they work out in performance. One of the projects that is really of interest to all of us is to get a small choral group together and do this harmonic synchronizing thing to produce these waveforms like I showed in the first part of my presentation, is to actually train the singers to produce them. I think that's the project that interests everybody the most right now. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, there's a big interest in my music television, which I'm starting to gather the parts for, but I'm still a couple $1,000s short in that I don't have the tools to punch the panels or do any of the metalworking to mount the parts, and I don't have a lot of the parts, and they'll have to be purchased or hunted down on eBay.
Can you describe it? The amoeba in a box, or?
Well, the music television thing takes on two forms. One of them uses the actual television set. The main complication is deriving the video, which takes a bunch of circuitry, and it takes a lot of figuring on the circuitry. Otherwise, it's basically as simple as taking the right channel and putting it into the horizontal deflection, and the vertical channel, or on the right channel, and putting it into the vertical, and the left and the horizontal, and getting the complex interaction pattern. But that becomes the raster, which normally is just the completely, lit TV screen. But in this case, it's the phase form of the music, and then when you add the video, it gives it depth, and it starts to take on a form of, it looks like an amoeba or a living object with the right music, particularly the music of Handel. Really makes some incredibly fantastic displays in the Bach organ music. The other type is the radar indicator type, and I haven't done this since childhood, but I've gathered up a lot of the basic materials to do it, but, of course, the equipment's got to be repaired or dismantled and rebuilt, and there's all the complications. But you use the radar suite, and then you take an audio spectrum analyzer and put the music into the audio spectrum analyzer, use the vertical deflection on the spectrum analyzer as the video for the radar indicator, and the music makes these most fantastic circular patterns that are just awesome. Again, depending on the kind of music. Of course, modern hump and slap music will not make any usable pattern on any of these displays, but it has to be, the early music or harmonic type of music. Right. And then, of course, it serves as a feedback mechanism for musical performers, too, that can, perform into the microphones and work with the display. So there's some interesting experimental possibilities there for musicians to interact with the display and produce some rather unique forms of music. So the music television right now is my main interest as far as, the indoor so-called laboratory type projects. So I have the necessary radar indicator, and I have the necessary old-style television, which you can't find anymore. It's actually a laboratory oscilloscope, but it uses a television tube rather than the oscilloscope type of cathode ray tube, so I can get the video into it without conflicting with the high voltage acceleration, because it uses magnetic deflection. So I'm still lacking the right transformers, and the solid-state amplifiers have to be sent somewhere to be repaired, which is expensive, or I can build my own vacuum tube amps, which I'm starting to gather the material for, and I prefer to do because I've designed a new type of audio amplifier that's radically different from the RCA designs, which basically dominate everything that's produced, tube or transistor. Goes back to the original RCA and Bell Telephone. There's only two types of designs. One is the push-pull vacuum tube transformer output, and the other one is the solid-state push-pull complementary symmetry I've come up with another type of amplifier based on Bell telephone carrier, wideband carrier technology used in the L carrier system and used in the front ends of radar receivers, where it's push-pull, but the tube configurations are completely different. And prototypes I've built in the past, which of course I've lost in all the episodes of the past, the amplifier is an absolutely stunning performance. So I'm actually working on that to limited capacity right now to build a prototype of it. But I still need to spend a couple $100 on specially wound transformers because just can't find the stuff on the internet. And the transformers I get from the GLOM are usually rated for voice frequency and not high fidelity, but some of them are close enough that that actually I think I can start doing some actual working vacuum tube experiments here now at any time.
I do want to mention that you said you received quite a bit of feedback on that Crystal Radio Initiative video, and that more people want to see, some of these like brief whiteboard type presentations.
Well, that's the objective for a couple of weeks from now, is to get much heavier into the Crystal Radio thing. With my hope out of it is I need someone to make some for me. I can't make them myself with what I got here. I'm hoping somebody can make a few of these coils for me so that I can do some experiments. The person that I had working on this, I've already complained about his transgressions in the whole thing, and he's been discharged. The other thing is the magnetic amplifier, what I call the parametric generation of electromotive force, which I've always considered as a possible way to circumvent the law of conservation of energy. If nothing else, it's a fantastically novel way to generate electromotive force. So it's very simple, straightforward setup. So I think we'll do a video presentation on that, and some circuit diagrams and what you have to build and what parts you have to find, and some of the basic theory behind it of what makes it unique way of generating electromotive force as compared to the other two ways of generating electromotive force. I wrote a paper on it called The Law of Electromagnetic Induction. So this is kind of a practical outcome of that paper. So I think those are the two things that are going to be turned into these packaged presentations rather than live presentations.
Right. Okay. And of course, you all probably know Eric's website, ericpdollar.com. And thanks for supporting Eric's work by purchasing a presentation or coming to the conference, because it does help. And the money from the presentations actually pays for the mortgage on the building that Eric is in addition to the insurance and property taxes. And we're going to look at trying to accelerate the payments on that so we can get that building paid off, hopefully within about another 12 months or less. Would be ideal. Faster the better. And if you do want to donate anything directly to Eric and EPD Labs, all that information is on the homepage on ericpdollar.com. And like Eric mentioned, here in about just a couple weeks, we will be doing a second presentation on Crystal Radio Initiative. That'll be another whiteboard presentation, and it will be Eric going over, say you pick a frequency on the AM band, and then exactly how to calculate the coil, so you know how many turns, and that's probably maybe the most important thing for people to take the information in the Crystal Radio Initiative and actually apply it to something. Is once they learn how to calculate the coil and do that, then hopefully we'll see some replications that people will be sharing. But that's definitely probably one of the simplest projects anybody could probably get involved in, move in the direction of learning, what Eric is sharing with us. So I guess that'll probably wrap it up, and I'll get this on YouTube here, hopefully within a couple days. And get any final comments, Eric?
Well, the thing about the Crystal Radio Initiative is that's the basic proof of the Nikola Tesla concept of caloric transmission. And that's why I'm encouraging it. And it's very simple and straightforward. It doesn't take a lot of complicated parts. And the AM radio station is providing the energy for transmission, part of it in a telluric form. So from what I've already seen in the energetic form from the scattered attempts to duplicate these things, is that it seems to prove that the Tesla telluric idea is valid, and that there's much less propagation loss in the telluric than there is over the air, and you can actually recover a small amount of usable electricity out of the telluric wave transmitted by the AM broadcast station. So the idea is to develop that further and to do experiments to get a rather substantial quantity of power, enough to, where it can't be denied that this is some near field effect or whatever, which basically really can't be applied to this because of the way the coils are configured, as they naturally reject all the near field. But it's a way to publicly prove that Nikola Tesla's transmission was right, and like the slogan was, a ham radio operator overturns Albert Einstein for $100 experiment.
I want to thank everybody for being on the call, and thank you, Eric, for your time and spending it today with us for about an hour and a half answering some questions. And I guess we'll go ahead and wrap it up. Great. Thanks, everybody, for being on the call. And thank you, Eric. Well, I'll talk to you soon.
Thanks for everybody's interest in this.
Absolutely. Okay. Take care, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Hey. Okay, so right now it's noon Pacific Daylight Savings Time. It's September 6, 2015, and I have Eric Dollard on the line. Recently, in the middle of July in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, we did the 2015 Energy Science and Technology Conference, and Eric gave a presentation that was almost 4 hours long. That includes questions at the end on the power of the ether as related to music and electricity. And so if you're on this call right now, that means you were invited because you either came to the conference or purchased the presentation, so you've at least seen it. And so kind of just an invitation-only call to give everybody an opportunity to have your questions answered. And I'll go ahead and bring on Eric, and then after we open up for questions, just hit 5*, and I'll know that you want to ask a question. So can you hear me okay, Eric?
Yeah, you're kind of clipping, but I can understand what you're saying.
Okay. And so now the presentation you gave, there's a couple things you wanted to address in it. First, just kind of give a context for the situation behind putting together the presentation, and it's really meant to be just kind of a basic intro to a lot of those things. And if you just go ahead and take over and go from there.
Yeah, so at any rate, it was kind of a last-minute effort because of the antenna projects and what have you, conflicting with the time that I needed to write it. So, and then I basically discovered in the process that this thing was much larger than I'd ever envisioned. So I had to do a lot of condensing and last-minute writing, and so basically the thing was finished as far as my note writing went about 15 minutes before I actually presented it. It's not a subject that I can speak with absolute authority on like I have in my previous presentations, so that also made it a little more difficult, but it seems like everything I wanted to say got out. Unfortunately, there seems to be some bad voodoo that came with it, and I'm going through some kind of curse or retribution for providing this information to the public, so hopefully that will dissipate, and those that want to get involved in this topic might be forewarned that some of the avenues may get a little scary if you get too deep into them. So that's kind of the scenario in which the most recent presentation is the ether ultimately is unknowable.
Now that J.J. Thomson work that you're discussing is mostly focusing on is electricity and matter? which was a series of talks.
J.J. Thomson's major effort, and actually one of the most interesting and readable parts of his very large book, is the conduction of electricity through gases and the works of Crookes and other contemporaries that came up with the notions of cathode rays and all these various type of phenomena. But unfortunately, none of that work was really completed, and relativity shot all these people down, even though it's been stated that J.J. Thomson is in direct conflict with Nikola Tesla. That's not the case at all. It actually really supports most of what Tesla was saying. The only problem between the two is Thomson, of course, was dealing with very crude experimental apparatus from early European experiments where there really wasn't much of an understanding of any engineering, nor even any engineering dimensions, where Tesla was a practicing engineer and inventor and developed experimental apparatus that was so far ahead of everybody else as that's what gave him such outstanding results. But unfortunately, Tesla, as a capitalist, hoarded all of his information and never wrote any books. And Thomson, I think, in disgust after the takeover of relativity and the Einsteiners, even though he lived basically the same years as Tesla, just as Tesla did after Wardenclyffe, which occurred about the same time, Thomson just simply shut up because the world said that he was full of it, and Einstein was where it was at, which is really unfortunate because there's a lot that could have been learned there. So this is the complication you face when you're getting into any of this stuff, is all you're going to end up with is scraps. It's like trying to reconstruct the dinosaur out of 10 or 15 bones that you found in a swamp, even though there's thousands of them that make up the body. It's a very difficult process.
Now, when you mentioned the bigger book, like a lot of people are familiar with electricity and matter, but there's a bigger volume, and does that one give more insight into Thomson's work, or does it just...
Yeah, that's basically what he does in there. Well, he subtitles the book as a sequel to Maxwell's work. Presentation was given.
Okay. Before I do open up for questions, just one person sent me some questions by email. I wasn't able to make it to the call. This is from Brett. He says, I've watched the video a few times now and am struggling to figure out specifically how to apply this knowledge and application. As I understand it in so many words, the patterns discussed during the presentation invite or encourage interaction with the ether. Can you expound on this issue somewhat? How can I utilize this information along with the math that you have developed and released recently to design and build energy machines that efficiently tap into the ether? It seems obvious to me that anytime a field, magnetic or dielectric, is made to change quickly, the momentum of the ether can be tapped. Is this correct?
Well, basically, in the same line of thinking as Pythagoras and Plato, who conceived most of what was presented, is none of this was provided with the intent of building anything or any type of energy machines or any energy devices. Actually, its intent is to transcend all that.
Now, the emails that I received after people watched your presentation, it seems like the most common theme or the most common topic that a lot of people seem to want to learn more about is what are your plans on going deeper into the J.J. Thomson stuff, which you shared at the very end of the presentation?
Well, I'm quite deep into that. In fact, I'm just wrapping that up. So that is basically the last presentation, the extraluminal presentation, where all I could do was just very scantily cover all the different areas of these electric waves and the forms of induction and how they arise out of the ether and what have you. In the most recent presentation, that was given as an appendix. I had spent most of my time, my writing time, where I wasn't out working on stuff before the presentation, developing the J.J. Thomson stuff, which I've now basically finished. So that will be in a book form. The title, Extraluminal Transmission, has been changed. The title of the book, this will be a very big book. And this is volume 1 that I've just completed now, which is basically the history into the general theory. Gets very deep into J.J. Thomson's writings in his big book called Recent Researches into Electricity and Magnetism. So what I've done, as well as with Steinmetz and a few other people, is taken their convoluted expressions, which are dimensionally inconsistent and are filled with typo errors, and the same letter is used for 10 or 15 different things without any drawings or explanations whatsoever, is beat my way through it, damn near killing myself, until I managed to resolve the situation, and then I put that into print. So this will be coming out. The title of the book will be The History, Theory, and Practice of Electric Transmission, where I've gone through the basic ether theories and the development of inductance and capacitance and resistance and all the basic terms that are used. And then the next volume will apply it to what is more commonly understood in electrical engineering, which is the two-wire and basic multi-wire transmission systems of transverse electromagnetic waves. And then volume 3 will be taking that information and adapting it and extending it to deal with the special types of waves that you find on the Alexanderson and the Tesla and the Marconi and all of the electrostatic wireless era constructions. And that will take a long time. So at any rate, volume 1 is complete. I pretty much developed J.J. Thomson's vague theory into something where there's diagrams and explanations. The dimensions all work out in establishing resistance and the basic how the ether polarizes, and I'm pretty satisfied with it. The only complication is taking the 500 pages out of my notebook collection and turning it into something which gets out in print. So that's a big task, and I don't know what kind of delay is going to be entailed with that, but at any rate, the thing is complete and is ready to be deposited for transcription in a couple of weeks. And then that will pretty much explain what is explainable at J.J. Thomson. Otherwise, he really leaves a lot out, and there's not a lot to work with. And all that really can be provided are suggestions for further theoretical thought and experiment. There's no absolute revelations about the ether or whatever, and it all falls back to my mind. But is what you start to find in his writings is he has a whole different view than that of James Clerk Maxwell, and it adheres more closely with the original ideas of Faraday. Unfortunately, all these people seem predisposed to make everything so unnecessarily mathematical complicated with no diagrams or drawings or physical explanations whatsoever, but just C's and C's of partial differential equations and multiple coordinates and all that type of stuff. It just makes it too complicated to work through, and you can't get anywhere with the stuff. That's the problem. So what I did in my most recent writing is I eliminated all the extraneous coordinates. I basically, with the work of Steinmetz and Kennelly and Heaviside in specifically quantifying what each variable, like, we've established E as electromotive force, and we've established I as current, and all those things. I've gone through and taken all these random letters and given them conventional terms, which I've established in all of my writings. So anyone that's read any of my materials should be very clear with what uppercase E means and lowercase e means and what L means and I and all these type of things. So cleaning up all the variables into a consistent and understandable format and getting rid of all the extraneous dimensions, getting rid of the 1 over the speed of light squares and the 4 pi times 10 to the 9th and all the other crap is I distilled the thing down into a very basic algebraic and geometric understanding of how the ether specifically interacts with the conductors in the transmission line and how resistance and inductance and all these things come about. Now, the other parts of Thomson's book are, I mean, I'll just simply take a lifetime to work out all the electromagnetic wave equations. But again, what's important is Thomson seems to be moving away from electromagnetism and coming up with another type of concept that seems more in tune with how actually light and electricity and these various things work. And that's what makes it particularly interesting, but it does not bring you to a point where you have a solid feeling that you understand what's going on. That's the problem.
Can you give a couple of examples of, let's say, the understanding of